Welcome to the Sober and Happy podcast, where we talk about all things recovery related, how to navigate the challenges we face on our journey towards our best lives, and how we could go from living a life of simply just being sober to a life where we're both sober and happy. Today, I want to tackle a common belief in many traditional recovery programs, the idea that alcoholics and addicts are powerless over their addiction. The notion is often found in 12-step programs and can be a central part of the recovery narrative. However, this belief can be limiting and even harmful for some people. So are we truly powerless over our addiction? Or is there another way to view our journey to sobriety that empowers us instead? Well, that's what we're going to be discussing today. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. Welcome back. To start, let's address where the concept of powerlessness comes from. In many 12-step programs, the first step is to admit that we are powerless over our addiction and that our lives have become unmanageable. This admission is often seen as a foundation for recovery, as it encourages humility and acceptance of the problem. While acknowledging the destructive power of addiction is crucial, the idea that we are powerless can sometimes be taken too far. It could lead to a sense of helplessness and resignation, which may prevent people from taking proactive steps to reclaim their lives. I've seen many cases where people have been sober for many years, yet fear that they're always at risk of relapse at any moment because of their powerless over alcohol. It is not uncommon to hear someone in an AA meeting say something like, "I'm just as close to the first drink as I was the day I got sober," insinuating that alcohol still has so much power over them that if they let up their guard even one bit, that they'll find themselves in a liquor store parking lot with the bottle in their hand. Now let me share a personal story. Early in my recovery, I embraced the idea of powerlessness because it was what I was taught. Plus, I'd been powerless over my drinking when I was active in my addiction. I knew that once I drank, I had no control, and anytime I tried to stop, I'd never been able to. But the idea of being sober for 25 years and having to always be on alert for a relapse didn't sound like a happy ending to a life free of addiction. To me, it sounded like being a slave to addiction even after years of not drinking. But I had no other solutions at the time, so I bought in. I believed that I had no control over my addiction, and the best that I could do was to follow the steps and hope for the best. This mindset led me to feel like a passive participant in my own recovery, constantly fearing relapse and doubting my ability to make choices for myself. Here's the thing about always being on high alert to avoid a relapse. You're still constantly thinking about alcohol. It felt like I went from obsessing about drinking to continually having to obsess about not drinking. Either way, I was always going to be obsessing about alcohol. When I was about 5 years sober, I heard a story about some of the first whitewater rafting guides. There's a particular spot in the river that they guided where a large tree stump was in the water, and if they hit it, the group would be in danger of overturning the raft. The guides would explain to the group, "We need to avoid that tree stump up there. To do that, I need you guys to paddle really hard to reach that point over there between the two rocks that we need to go." Despite the good instructions, a clear path to safety, and great effort by the entire group of people in the raft, they still hit the stump almost every time. After a while, one of the guides decided to try a different tactic. He chose not to mention the stump at all and told the group to focus on the point between the two rocks. After he did that, the groups he guided stopped hitting the stump in the river and easily navigated between the two rocks. They found that although the people were paddling as hard as they could, they were subconsciously paddling towards the stump because that is where their focus was, rather than the destination between the two rocks. They learned that where your focus goes, your energy flows. At that moment, I realized that is what I was doing in my recovery. By focusing on always having to avoid alcohol because I was so powerless over it, I was always keeping my focus on the obstacle I was trying to avoid. It was causing me to always live in a state of anxiety over the next potential relapse, which was blocking me from living. As I progressed in my recovery journey, I began to question this belief. As I started branching out and meeting sober people outside of AA, I started noticing that many of the people who were successful in their sobriety were not just passively accepting their situation, but were actively working to improve their lives. I asked a guy I'd met who had left AA 20 years before and still had remained sober if he ever thought about drinking, and he said he couldn't remember the last time he did. We're having this conversation while having dinner at his house. His wife was sitting next to him enjoying a glass of wine. He noticed me glance over at her glass. He laughed at me and said, "Yes, no cravings, even when my wife likes to have a glass of wine occasionally." I had to know, so I asked him, "Aren't you worried that having alcohol in your house might tempt you to drink?" He looked at me and said, "Tim, I don't drink, so why would it?" He could tell that I looked confused, so he asked me if I ever smoked meth before, and I told him that I hadn't. He then asked me, "If I put a loaded meth pipe in front of you right now, would you be tempted?" I said no, and he asked me why not, and I said, "Well, because I don't smoke meth." He looked at me and said, "Exactly." He then asked me if I drank, and I said no. And he said, "Well, why would you be any more tempted over a bottle of wine if you don't drink?" He followed up by saying, "Your problem isn't that you are powerless over alcohol. It is that you have not allowed yourself the identity shift to accepting that you no longer are a drinker." This observation led me to a significant realization. While addiction is powerful, it doesn't mean that we are powerless. And although I know I could never drink again, I could also accept the mindset that I'm never going to drink again because I don't drink. Let's break down why this belief in powerlessness can be problematic. First, it could lead to a sense of victimhood. When we see ourselves as powerless, we may adopt a victim mentality, believing that our addiction controls us and that we are at its mercy. This mindset could prevent us from taking responsibility for our actions and making the necessary changes to improve our lives. Second, it could hinder motivation. If we believe that we're powerless, we might think, "What's the point of trying?" This could lead to a lack of motivation and effort as we assume that no matter what we do, our addiction will ultimately win. Third, it could limit our growth potential. Believing that we are powerless over our addiction could stop us from exploring new ways of thinking, learning new skills, and developing healthier habits. It could keep us stuck in a cycle of dependency on external support without fostering our inner strength and resilience. How many times have you heard someone say, "I need a meeting," when they're struggling with the craving? That is because they have been taught that they don't have the power inside themselves to get them through. Now, I'm not saying that seeking support is not incredibly beneficial, but adopting the mindset that you do not have the power yourself to get you through it will always make you dependent on outside forces to get you through challenging times. So how do we reframe this belief in a way that empowers us and supports our recovery? One approach is acknowledging the power of addiction while recognizing our own power. Addiction is undoubtedly a powerful force, but it doesn't mean that we are helpless. We have the power to make choices, seek help, and take actions that support our sobriety. Another approach is to focus on building our self-confidence. This allows us to believe in our ability to influence events and outcomes. It's about developing confidence in our capacity to handle challenges and achieve our goals. By setting small, achievable goals and gradually working towards larger ones, we could build our self-confidence and take more control over our recovery journeys. Additionally, we could adopt a growth mindset. Growth mindset is the belief that our abilities and intelligence can be developed through dedication and hard work. It's about viewing challenges as opportunity for growth rather than unachievable obstacles. By adopting a growth mindset, we could see our recovery journey as a process of continuous improvement where each step forward, no matter how small, contributes to our overall progress. In conclusion, while acknowledging the power of addiction is important, it's equally important to recognize our own power in the recovery process. We are not helpless victims, but active participants in our journey to sobriety. By embracing a mindset of empowerment, building self-confidence, and adopting practical strategies to support our growth, we could overcome addiction and create a fulfilling, sober life. Remember, you have the power to change your life, and every step you take brings you closer to the sober and happy life that you deserve. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Here's your weekly challenge. I want you to listen to what you think and say over the next couple of days. Are you saying things that empower you, or are you repeating things that limit your growth? When you catch yourself saying things like, I've never been able to, or I'm just not good at, stop and rephrase it with a statement that returns your power to the situation. You have the power to change your identity, but it starts by changing your mindset, which is controlled by what you say and think. Change your story, and you could change your life. So let's get to changing. That is my challenge for you this episode. New episodes come out each Friday, so I look forward to connecting with you next week. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and keep living sober and happy.